Good morning, and thank you for being here. Yeah, I'm here physically in Ottawa once again. I'll be Elizabeth May, Green Party, Saanich Gulf Islands. I'll be covering for our caucus until the end of the session, June 17th or 18th. I think we'll probably wrap on the 17th. C'est un grand plaisir d'être ici pour le Parti vert, dont la Chambre des communes, dont notre système de parlement hybride et aussi en personne. Parce que pour moi-même, je suis pour les prochaines quelques semaines la représentative du Parti vert en personne avec mes collègues qui vont participer avec le Zoom de leur circumscription. So I wanted to speak this morning. I spoke to the matter yesterday afternoon, of course, in the House, in response to the Prime Minister's speech about racism and violence and what we're seeing take place in the United States. And of course, we reflected on anti-Black racism that continues within Canada. We also know that Indigenous people in Canada face racism on a daily basis. Dale Culver's murder in 2017 has now been acknowledged for what it was, murder, and there will be criminal charges against the RCMP officers who were involved. An Indigenous man in Prince George who died in circumstances not that different from how we're seeing Black men killed in the United States and in Canada. But there's no question that what's taking place in Canada and in the United States differs in one quite substantial way. And that is that when we face moments of grief, of shame, of horror, we can look to our elected leaders, whether our premiers or the Prime Minister, to at least attempt to give us solace, leadership, to encourage us to believe that better is possible. Now, I take Jagmeet Singh's point from yesterday that the Prime Minister's speech is pretty words and so on. But pretty words are so much better than vile language so bad that Twitter decides to put a warning that it incites violence, that Facebook employees quit because Mark Zuckerman won't take down comments that are incendiary. And those comments are from the President of the United States. Hier, j'ai dit qu'on doit faire les choses, d'agir en solidarité avec les peuples noirs, avec les manifestations, avec les peuples qui veulent la vraie justice, qui exigent la justice, pardonnez-moi, la justice. People right now, regardless of skin color, are demanding justice. And peaceful protests must not be met with police brutality. And the example I mentioned yesterday in the House, because it's so deeply shocking, was that the U.S. executive would clear away peaceful protesters from in front of a church, including members of the clergy who were there to give out cookies and bottled water to protesters demanding justice in the death of George Floyd. Clear away protesters using tear gas in a peaceful protest that posed no threat to anyone, in order to clear a pathway so the President of the United States could stage a photo op in front of an Episcopal church of great historic significance, hold up a Bible as what the Bishop of the Episcopal Church of the United States of America, Michael Curry, described as a purely partisan action. The situation in the United States is made more dire by what Donald Trump does. So I wanted to make it really clear once again, because the Green Party has asked for this before, we ask for it again. It's clear that if you're Muslim, if you're Black, if you're Latina, if you're Indigenous, the United States is not a safe country. And our safe country agreement with the United States, which means we turn away people that in other circumstances would have a claim for refugee status, simply can't stand anymore. We need to change that status so that people seeking refugee protections in Canada can get here. So I once again call on the Prime Minister and the Minister of Immigration and the Minister of Foreign Affairs to explain that under the circumstances in this pandemic, as long as people who come across our border meet our COVID-19 public safety rules, we must not turn them away because Donald Trump has made the United States no longer safe. And I'm open to any questions anyone might have. Je suis disponible pour les questions.
We'll now start the question period. As usual, one question, one follow-up. We'll start with the question on the phone and then turn to the room. Opérateur, on est prêt pour la première question?
Merci, thank you. Please press star 1 at this time if you have a question. S'il vous plaît, appuyez sur étoile 1 maintenant pour poser une question. La première question est de Hélène Buzetti. Le Devoir, votre ligne est maintenant ouverte. À vous la parole.
Oui, bonjour Madame May. J'avais une question vraiment technique, mais votre parti a demandé la subvention salariale. Je voudrais savoir à combien d'argent estimez-vous avoir le droit? Je sais que l'argent n'a pas commencé à être versé, mais il y a des calculateurs en ligne. Quelle est l'évaluation de ce que va vous rapporter cette subvention?
Bonjour Hélène Buzetti, merci pour la question. Malheureusement, j'ai aucune idée parce que je suis pas le directeur exécutif du Parti vert du Canada. La gestion du Parti vert du Canada est avec notre équipe et avec la direction des autres peuples, pas avec les députés verts. Mais nous n'avons pas une très grande équipe. Je pense que ce n'est pas un très grand chiffre, mais je peux demander à notre nouveau directeur exécutif qui s'appelle Pratik Awashi et aussitôt que possible, mon équipe va rappeler et donner cette information.
Et donc, j'en comprends que vous pensez que cette information devrait être publique. Je voulais juste vous relancer. Aujourd'hui, c'est la date limite pour être candidat à la chefferie pour votre succession. À date, il y a, je pense, 6 candidats. Qu'est-ce que vous pensez de la course comme telle qu'elle se profile et regrettez-vous d'avoir participé peut-être à côté de Mme Annamie Paul et Amita Kuttner qui a été un peu critiquée?
Oui, nous avons les candidats excellents dans la course à la chefferie et je pense qu'il sera un autre ou deux aujourd'hui parce qu'il y a les candidats qui ont fait leur effort pour organiser, pour lever des fonds qui ne sont pas déjà annoncés. Alors, il sera peut-être 7 ou 8, je ne suis pas certaine, mais je pense que la course à la chefferie pour moi, c'est les vedettes, vraiment les candidats extraordinaires comme Annamie Paul, Amita Kuttner, Glenn Murray, l'ancien maire de Winnipeg, l'ancien ministre d'Environnement, du gouvernement d'Ontario. C'est un groupe, David Murner, puis maintenant aussi les autres qui sera, j'espère, accepté comme Mariam Haddad, avocat à Montréal, qui était aussi extraordinaire. Il y a les gens très forts dans cette course à la chefferie et nous avons maintenant le période de campagne et le processus de vote va commencer au mois de septembre. C'est difficile, évidemment, dans une pandémie, d'avoir une course à la chefferie, mais je suis certaine que notre course à la chefferie sera tellement plus intéressant de laquelle des conservateurs.
Prochaine question au téléphone.
Merci, thank you. La question suivante est de Lina Dip, la presse canadienne. À vous la parole.
Oui, bonjour, Madame May. On a déjà su qu'une personne qui ne sera pas candidate dans cette course, c'est M. Tyrell au Québec. Et il dit, lui, que s'il abandonne ses ambitions au leadership, c'est parce qu'il a subi des pressions puis même des menaces de vous et de votre entourage. Alors, je me demandais, qu'est-ce que vous répondez à ça?
Oui, je laissais les mots d'Alex Terrell avec lui. C'est pas vrai. Je pense c'est bizarre après. Il a fait la course à la chefferie, il a fait son annonce. Mais évidemment, il ne comprend pas la structure du Parti vert, notre constitution. Nous avons un conseil fédéral et il a nommé, il a dit dans son entrevue les choses qui c'est pas vrai. J'ai pas nommé mon mari. Il était élu dans un processus vraiment démocratique dans le parti. Et pour moi, comme député du Parti vert dans la Chambre des communes, je jouais pas un rôle dans la gestion du parti. Ce n'est pas un seul niveau de pouvoir pour moi dans la gestion du Parti vert du Canada. Je reste dans le Conseil fédéral comme l'ancien chef, mais je n'ai pas le pouvoir de voter. Alors, je pense que Alex Terrell a fait son décision. Je dis à lui, bonne chance comme chef du Parti vert du Québec. Et nous avons les autres candidats pour un course à la chefferie qui sera très intéressant. Et j'espère que les gens, les membres du Parti vert du Canada et les autres Canadiens et Québécois et Québécoises qui sont intéressés dans une partie avec un avenir, avec un avenir de promesses. Et maintenant, c'est clair dans la pandémie que les politiques du Parti vert du Canada sont les politiques que maintenant tout le monde parle de garanties annuelles universelles pour salaire annuel garanti d'abordable. Nous avons les politiques pour augmenter notre système de santé publique, les politiques pour une économie verte pour l'avenir. Alors, je pense que nous sommes dans une bonne position dans notre course à la chefferie et bonne chance à M. Terrell.
Croyez-vous que la sortie de M. Terrell pourrait nuire au recrutement au Québec, étant donné que les Verts québécois c'est aussi son parti? Est-ce que vous avez peur d'un impact là-dessus? Et puis, je voulais savoir, qu'est-ce que vous pensez de... Vous vantiez la qualité des candidats au leadership. Pensez-vous que c'est une brochette assez diversifiée ou est-ce que c'est pas encore un autre groupe d'hommes blancs d'un âge moyen comme les autres partis?
Je pense qu'il ne fait pas une différence, pas du tout. Nous avons un groupe intéressant, un groupe divers. Et je dis que je pense qu'une candidate très forte au Québec, comme Mme Mariam Haddad, avocat, une femme extraordinaire, qui aussi a dit, comme M. Terrell, qu'elle était socialiste écolo. Il n'y a pas un problème de trouver quelqu'un qui dit nous avons une politique, un choix. C'est clair que dans la Constitution du Parti vert du Canada, la chef ou le chef du Parti vert du Canada ne jouait pas un rôle comme dans les autres partis. Le rôle, c'est de devenir notre porte-parole plus haut. Ça, c'est le rôle de chef du Parti vert du Canada. Comme chef, il y a 13 ans que j'ai joué le rôle, je n'avais pas le pouvoir que M. Terrell a dit. Je reste comme quelqu'un qui s'est dans un rôle de servir l'intérêt des membres pour un mouvement vert. Et j'ai beaucoup de confiance. Je pense que Mariam Haddad est quelqu'un qui était, les gens dans son équipe a dit qu'elle est pour Canada notre AOC. Elle est quelqu'un avec un esprit tellement intéressant et vraiment passionné. Alors, avec Annamie Paul, Amita Kuttner, David Murner, Glenn Murray, c'est peut-être les autres qui ne sont pas déjà annoncés. Je pense que nous avons une très forte équipe et j'ai hâte le moment quand les gens qui sont maintenant les candidats pour la chefferie du Parti vert de Canada, quand tout le monde vont devenir un groupe de caucus parlementaire. C'est pour moi un rêve, mais c'est vraiment possible.
Opérateur, prochaine question au téléphone.
Merci, thank you. The next question is from Mia Rapson from the Canadian Press. Please go ahead. Your line is open.
Good morning. I'm also curious about the leadership race. There were concerns early on that the fees that the Green Party had set were too high. Several people who've been looking at running said they were too high, and most of those people have now chosen not to run. They're not on the list. What do you think about the fees? Were they set too high, or do you think that it was a fair amount?
Well, I'm part of the party and don't want to dive into my personal views on the rules that were set. They were approved by our elected federal council, and the fees that were set certainly were a lot more than what I faced in 2006 in the last leadership race. But the situation has changed. We're not any longer a group of people in the wilderness where everybody said when I was running in 2006. I didn't get any questions from the media about our fees, and nobody thought that I had a chance of getting elected. So everything has changed for the Green Party since 2011. I was the first elected Green at a federal or provincial level, and now we have, I think it's nearly 20 people between 4 provinces and the federal level where we have elected Greens. And so becoming leader of the Green Party is a real thing. And if you can't raise the money to compete in a leadership race for a party that has an elected caucus sitting in Parliament, then it did winnow it out. But we did change the rules in the face of COVID-19. So initially, anyone whose name was to appear on the ballot in early September would have to have raised $50,000 just to pay to the party as a non-refundable commitment that you're running for leader. That was reduced to $30,000 by the beginning of September. So any of the names you see when the deadline is over and the list of approved candidates is announced, and there are at least 1 or 2 appeals going on over internal decisions around vetting, but when those names are announced, they will have committed and already paid in $10,000. The second tranche of an additional $20,000 from each of them will be due at the end of the summer. And so far, people are raising money. I've been participating in helping candidates in fundraising events that we've been doing on Zoom. And it seems that, yes, indeed, our membership, and by the way, anyone can join the Green Party for $10 to vote for the person that you think would be the next best leader of the Green Party of Canada. Voting is one person, one vote from wherever you are across Canada. So you don't have to physically come to our convention if, in fact, we feel we can have a physical convention. I think it's unlikely at this point that we'll be physically gathering in Prince Edward Island in the first weekend of October. But so far, the people who are serious have not been having trouble raising the money.
And I'm also... you mentioned the committee vetting or sort of reviewing the appeals. There was also a lot of criticism that process is very secretive. There's not a lot of information about what is going into making those decisions, and that the candidates aren't getting a lot of information about why they were or were not approved. Can you speak to that, please?
Yes, I'm really glad you asked that question. Thank you, Mia Rabson. The candidates are given all the information if they choose to contest the decision. There's nothing about that that's been. I haven't seen the dossiers myself, nor have the council members. The council will be ratifying any decisions that are made, but there's an appeal process. As soon as a candidate appeals, they're given all the information, and they have a right to speak to it. It contrasts quite sharply. I saw some social media content comparing how Paul Manley was treated by the New Democrats. This wasn't, of course, a leadership race, but when he wanted to run as a candidate in the seat he now holds in Nanaimo Ladysmith, he was denied the right to run, and he was never told why. And the leadership of the NDP and the circle around the leader at the time hinted darkly that there were things about Paul Manley they couldn't share, but they were sure it would all come out eventually. But he couldn't run for them. He wasn't up to snuff. They wouldn't let him run in Nanaimo Ladysmith. They never told him why. They gave him no information. But they actually, I think, risked damaging his reputation by hinting darkly that there was something. Well, it's at the discretion of any of the candidates. Right now we have 2 who faced an initial turn down to their applications. The process for the candidates, I think, is full and fair to have all the information and have their opportunity for appeal. So I think the processes will hold up to scrutiny as being fair and transparent.
We'll now turn to the room. Mackenzie?
Hi, Ms. May. Mackenzie Gray from CTV News. In your early remarks, you were quite forceful in your rebuke of President Trump and how he's handled the protests so far. Yesterday, when given opportunities, Ms. Freeland and Mr. Trudeau didn't reference Mr. Trump by name and were somewhat muted in their criticism of the president. Do you think that they should be more forceful and name him specifically for how things have gone over the last week and a half?
What I hope that they will do is take on board and the request from the Greens for months now that we renegotiate, well, for years actually, that we reestablish what it means to be a safe third country, and say that in the case of people coming to our border through the United States, they shouldn't be turned away. We've been making this point since Trump came to office with his anti-Muslim ban, that you couldn't be a Muslim in the United States and feel safe. It was no longer a safe third country. Particularly now, it's not a safe third country. I want to give the Prime Minister and Deputy Prime Minister the space to navigate how they deal with the Trump White House. But as an individual and as parliamentary leader for the Green Party, I can't stand by and watch what the president is doing without being one of the voices that I hope is heard from within our borders and into the United States to give comfort to those who are protesting, to give comfort to governors who've been told in the face of their efforts to keep the peace, the president of the United States calls governors weak and threatens to bring the military in. This is a very dangerous situation, and I do think those of us in other countries should speak out. But I won't criticize the Prime Minister and the Deputy Prime Minister, because the nature of what they have to do in negotiating keeping the border closed for safety right now for COVID-19, we're in different jobs and different roles. I just knew I could not stay silent as the President of the United States urged violence and in coded language has been giving succor and oxygen for years now to white supremacists. And I also spoke yesterday in Parliament. I think it's essential that we in Canada hold a full inquiry to determine to what extent white supremacist organizations are infiltrating our own police forces and our own military. The memo from the FBI to warn, it was an FBI bulletin from 2006 that was recently documented in The Guardian, that that memo from the FBI warned that white supremacist groups were deliberately targeting joining police forces as officers. That begins to explain what we're seeing, because it's the numbers of acts of violence, killing Black men, and assuming that they faced no charges. That there's something very, very disturbingly wrong. And I think we need to know in Canada, we know we have white supremacist groups that organize. We know CSIS has warned of this. We need to recognize them for the terrorists that they are. And as I said yesterday in my speech in Parliament, if there's one thing worse than a white supremacist with a gun, it's a white supremacist with a gun and in uniform. There's no reason to think this isn't happening in Canada. We need a full inquiry to determine the extent to which it is.
On another topic, the NDP and the Liberals have struck a deal to limit Parliament for an extended period of time. You've been around Parliament for a long period of time. Mr. Scheer has said that it is a central service. We should be sitting. What is your opinion on this?
Oh, my opinion of Mr. Scheer is that he has a remarkably short memory, because I don't recall him having any problem with Stephen Harper proroguing Parliament. We didn't have standing committees meeting on Zoom. We had nothing. And it was I'll remind Mr. Scheer the comparisons. We were in an international global emergency. It was a financial crisis in 2008. And Mr. Harper decided to shut down Parliament because there was a vote he was going to lose, which would have ousted him from power. It was unprecedented in Westminster parliamentary democracies and throughout the Commonwealth. The only last time it had happened was Sir John A. Macdonald on the Pacific scandal. And Mr. Harper also only enjoyed a minority. So my view is, yes, Parliament is essential. Yes, it is. But it is not an essential service in the way that Mr. Scheer thinks, that we must gather here in larger numbers. As soon as we start dealing with controversial legislation, which we must do, and gather in larger numbers, we create a public health threat, not just to ourselves as MPs, but to everyone with whom we come in contact. And if we are traveling Ottawa back to I'm now here, as I mentioned at the beginning, for a 3-week stretch. I'm not going to go home to my riding on a weekend. The trip is, frankly, very stressful, very difficult, and takes twice as long as it used to. And I don't want to be a threat to my community. So when I get home to Sydney on Vancouver Island, where we have a very low rate of COVID-19, I'm going to spend a 2-week self-isolation. My colleague Jenica Atwin, who did the last shift, has gone home to New Brunswick for 2-week isolation. Mr. Scheer is living on some other planet if he doesn't think that COVID-19 is a reason that we can't meet in person in Parliament. Now, I do agree, and I agree with my friend Michael Chong, who's also conservative, who said we really need to find ways to be really able to function as Parliament, not just as a COVID-19 committee when we gather. So, and I do like the hybrid Parliament. I recommended it to the Committee on Procedure and House Affairs. I wrote a brief to the committee to urge that we adopt a hybrid Parliament. But my second part of that brief is, and we need to figure out how do we vote virtually. And I was so pleased that yesterday Speaker Anthony Rota said we have no technical difficulty in anticipating the day when members of Parliament can vote on bills, but at a distance. Once we've solved that problem, I mean, I do disagree with the Speaker that he said he doesn't think we'll see this anytime soon. I think we must see it soon because there's legislation we have to deal with that can't be dealt with by unanimous consent. We need to see pharmacare legislation. We need to move forward on it. We need to see the legislation for 5-year accountability periods to get to carbon neutrality by 2050. We need a new climate target. All of those things. We don't need legislation for a new climate target, but we do need legislation for an accountability act. And the Standing Committee on the Environment, despite the Greens asking for the Environment Committee to be one of the committees that is meeting, none of the other parties thought that was important, so we had no support on that. So I would have had to stand alone, denying unanimous consent and stopping billions of dollars from reaching Canadians for CERB and so on in order to insist on Environment Committee being in the mix. But we do need to meet more. We need to do more of the functions of a full Parliament, but not based on Mr. Scheer's argument that we're an essential service and should all show up. That is nonsense. We need to use the tools we've got that allow us to take what we've done remarkably well. And I just want to stop for a moment to say thank you to the IT team of the House of Commons. That group has never worked so, I mean, they're always a hardworking group, but this has really tested. And our translators, all the translators who are working so hard to deal with the additional complexity of witnesses on, at a distance with bad microphones. And I know there have been workplace injuries for our translators because of the difficulty of trying to work through all the different systems that they're hearing. So merci beaucoup vers l'équipe pour l'interprétation a fait un job incroyable. Même chose pour l'équipe pour notre système de IT. Mais nous avons maintenant les prochaines étapes. On doit avoir un système pour voter. Et voter de chez nous, notre circonscription, et faire un vote sécuritaire. Once we can vote from our home ridings, there's no reason we can't take on all the functions of a full functioning Parliament, which includes studying legislation and passing legislation.
Thank you very much. This concludes the press conference this morning.
Merci beaucoup. Merci tout le monde qui participait au téléphone. Merci ici pour les journalistes qui sont ici ce matin. Merci à vous. Merci. Thank you very much.